of slums in the first place. North Africa is the most urbanized sub-region in Africa. By 2050, more than 2/3 of North Africans will be living in urban areas. According to official statistics and reports, 13% of North Africa's population were classified as living in slums, down from 20.3 in 2000, but this just raises the issue of what is actually the definition of slums. Because, like Dr. Kofi said, we have different terminologies: slums, squatter areas, the informal settlements. So the differing definitions of slums will really impact the statistics and the way we look at them. The slums is considered a huge challenge that results from lack of affordable housing, as well as very poor policies and very weak governance in dealing with them since they started to emerge. A very good example would be that a middle-income family in Algeria would have to save its household income for 9 to 12 years to be able to afford an average dwelling. This pushes a lot of people, this is just not in Algeria, this is in most of the North African countries, and this just pushes people into slums to make use of the free housing, the very low costs that are entailed there. Policy in these countries has also been skewed towards the well-off portions of the society. North African governments have actually, the regressive approach has been the dominant approach. Of course, we have a few very good examples. However, usually the way the governments deal with slums is they chose to ignore them completely, and then they tried at some point to evict them, forced evictions, and then we have the phenomenon of satellite cities, just taking them and moving them into very far away places like the desert areas or areas that they want to build. This is how the governments chose to deal with slums, mainly, and we also have the way the community dealt with slums, or the people dealt with slums, is that most of we have the emergence of the gated communities in North African cities, with the emerging compounds and islands of prosperity, especially in parts like Egypt and Morocco, where just people choose to move away and go into more elitist parts of the city. Again, the idea of Arab uprisings, would this be a window of opportunity? There is a new perception of slums. There is an increased say in governance for slums because after the Arab Spring in most countries, the civil society has begun to play a very important role, and they began to try to empower the inhabitants of slums. There is the issue of manipulation of slums. They constitute a huge part of North African cities. For example, one of the main promises that were made in the Algerian presidential elections was that they promised slum dwellers that they would give them housing and improve their situation if they vote for the president in the elections. So there is this sign that they could be politically manipulated. And there are also positive things and creative ways of addressing the slum challenge, and we have two very good examples, the Cairo's Ibn Beitak initiative in Egypt and Morocco's Ville sans Bidonville program in Morocco. The second article will actually look into the slums from a different perspective, the economic perspective. Slums they form the base of the pyramid in relation to economic activities. By looking at the populations of slum dwellers in North African countries, they are diverse. We have university professors, we have garbage collectors, we have a diversity of people in slums. They are mostly profusely engaged in the informal sector of activity. And there is also the phenomenon of economic clusters, where different slums in the city are actually clustered around a certain economic activity. For example, in Egypt, you have the Manshayt Nasser, which are known as the Zabbalin, or the garbage collectors. So this is the main economic activity in this slum, for example. There is also the importance to realize that slums are not just a place where the people live. A lot of people join slums because it is a source of their livelihood. And there exists a lot of barriers to the opportunities that are available to slums due to several factors that include, for example, their lack of access to finance. If they have access to finance, they would be able to innovate better. There is, of course, the risk of manipulation by government officials in North African countries because most of the slum areas are actually illegal settlements as well. So there is always this risk of manipulation by corrupt government officials. There is also the treatment of the government. There's a very hostile treatment to these people as they are seen as capitalizing on things that they weren't supposed to exist in the first place. The slum areas are actually contributors to urban development. Today, informal slum economies are excluded in favor of government pursuits of world-class cities. The idea of turning into a world-class city is on the agenda of North African governments, and so it is in their favor to just get rid of slums which make the city look terrible. A positive tipping point would be to look at informal economies as directly integrated into city planning and priorities, and to just widely accept them as being there. And the future, we would like national and local governments to actively support slum economies and reduce slum dweller isolation and harassment. There is a need to look at slums as opportunities and not opportunity costs. There is a huge potential to turn today's slum dwellers into tomorrow's winners. This would require enhancing slum dweller connectivity, taking these slum dwellers and throwing them into the desert or far away from the eye is actually not a solution to the problem. We have had a lot of cases where the slum dwellers just go back to the slums because this is where this is where their livelihood exists. This is where their economic connections happen. So this has proved to be a non-viable solution. There's also a need to address the problems that are underlying urban poverty in the first place. These people are here because they don't have any other options or alternatives. They don't have any access to finance. So we just need to deal with the reasons for this poverty. And of course, there is the potential of the creative economy. The way forward, we would need to give women a voice and visibility. It would be interesting to note that 2/3 of slums are actually inhabited by women. So there is a need to look at women and the role in the economy as well. There's a need to link the development plans to the needs and areas. We cannot just have a solution that fits for all. And we need to look at the slum dwellers as active agents in policy formulation and involve them in the policies that are taken. Finally, we look at the resilience in the slum communities, and this just looks at the more social aspect. In slums, unfortunately, there is always a disaster waiting to happen. We have the issue of unsafe slum areas. For example, in Egypt, we have the Douai slum area, which is somewhere in the Rocky Mountain. And for example, the 2008 incident of the rock slide caused the death of tens of people living there, and that was when the government decided to look into moving these people into a more safer area. This is just one example. But most of the slum areas are actually people that are living in very crowded, unsafe conditions, and they are just left there until the disaster actually happens. There is also this problem of gentrification, where the government focuses on slum areas that are on valuable land. These are the slums that the government looks into dealing with. These are the people that they want to move out because at the end of the day they need this land to build centers, to expand their government places, etc. And this raises the problem of skepticism amongst slum dwellers when the government approaches them with the promises to enhance their living conditions. How sincere is the government really? And this causes them to oppose any options provided by government officials. And it also leads, if the government actually resorts to forced evictions, many of the slum dwellers actually move into an even worse condition of clandestine slums, and they resort to, for example, staying at the cemeteries, etc., which is just not a solution to the problem, but routes to another problem. Slum dwellers have very low life chances due to many factors, as you can see. They have a lot of health problems in slums. There's lack of social security, no access to finance. They have lack of preventive public programs. Example, they don't have anybody to protect them. They are not acknowledged by the police forces in the first place.